Hello, and welcome to another video of Well-Architected Framework series on AWS. My name is Gami, and today we're going to be talking about the operations pillar on the AWS Well-Architected Framework. As part of that, we will go through what the operational excellence definition is as per AWS and the Well-Architected Framework. We'll also look at some of the specific design principles that are aligned with the operational excellence pillar. And then we'll go through the AWS console. We'll open up the well-architected tool, and I'll walk you through all of the questions that become part of the evaluation of the operational excellence pillar. And we'll talk through what the questions are, what they mean, why they're relevant, and all of the responses that go along with it, so that you have a better understanding of how to respond to them when you're performing reviews in your own workloads. And just to recap a workload, when we talk about a workload, we basically mean a combination of your the technology stack that's the application that you're putting in the cloud, but it also includes the team that works on that application and the processes that go around the application. So the combination of your technology, your people, and your processes together becomes the scope of the workload. So when we look through all these questions as part of the framework, keep that in mind, that when we say workload, the scope is not just your application and the technical part of it, but it also includes the team that works on it and the processes that you have in place in order to make everything work properly. All right, so when we talk about operational excellence, what exactly does that mean? When we look at the AWS Well-Architected Framework, it defines the operational excellence pillar as a combination of four different things. It looks at what your organization is. So how is your team structured? What kind of resources do you have on your team? What kind of culture do you have in place? Do you have a process for identifying what the team should be working on? There needs to be clarity around, who does what, and why are we doing certain things, and in that order of priority. So having that in place helps lay the foundation for how the team gets together and prepares for the next stage of operational excellence. And that is actually the preparation stage. The preparation aspect of operations is knowing exactly what your workloads are, understanding them in detail. So specifically what the expected behaviors are, like what is considered to be normal state, what is considered to be operational and up and running versus what is an abnormal, unexpected state. So having a good enough understanding of your workloads helps with that level of understanding and troubleshooting, so that when something does go wrong, that everybody on the team knows why that is an operational anomaly, and it's not just something that's an expected behavior. The next piece is around the actual operating in the cloud. And that requires you to have a good understanding of the health of your workload, and not just the health of the application itself and the underlying infrastructure, but also the health of your operations. That includes more things like, is your process in place? Are people getting notified when they should be getting notified? That aspect of it, is that healthy? Looking at which of your organizational and business outcomes might be at risk given your current operational effectiveness, and if an outcome is getting at risk, does the team have the ability to notify the right people in a timely fashion? And then beyond that notification, do we have the right setup in place to respond to those events in an automated fashion, if possible, and as much as where we can, we prefer to automate things, but where we cannot automate, do we have the right process in place so that a playbook or a runbook is defined that the team can follow and get back to a healthy, normal state? And then using all of this, do we have the right evolution mechanism in place so that all the lessons that we learn through these operational events and incidents happening, if we go through and make some changes, can we finish that feedback loop so that we can make improvements to our operational process so that the next time around an event happens, we are in a better position to respond to it more proactively or in a quicker way to get back to a resolution state. So that's the overall understanding of what the operational excellence pillar is going to cover for us. Now let's look at the design principles that have been defined by AWS, and these are all available on the AWS Well-Architected portal, and it's part of the documentation. But as far as the documentation is concerned, I think it's an excellent resource, and whenever you can, I would recommend that you reference what's in the documentation. There's a lot of information and detail available. Obviously, we won't go through all of it on this video, but it's there for you to look at and learn more from. So the first design principle is, perform operations as code. This is part of what I was talking about in terms of automating as much as you can. So whenever you have, an incident or an event that happens that can be automated or performed as a script, then prefer to do that. Instead of somebody going in, logging into a server, and resetting a particular process, make that into a script and let that script be kicked off if that incident happens again. So all of this is part of the thought process and how you design your workloads so that they can support things like performing operations as code. As you make changes, lean more towards making frequent and small reversible changes. So as something comes in, instead of waiting for a huge big release to happen, break down all of those pieces to the extent possible within your workload, and make as frequent and small reversible changes as you can. That way, if something does break, you have a quicker way to recover from that without impacting your customers. The next one is around refining your operations and the procedures frequently. Looking at your operations procedures, looking at where things are taking longer than expected, and then coming back to improving those areas will help with the smoothness with which your team is able to respond to any such events that happen in the future. Anticipating failure. This is more about having an exercise where you can think about what kind of failures can happen, however unlikely they may be, and determine whether or not you need to build in something that helps you remove those potential failures, or if that is an unlikely event that you don't want to actually spend the time and effort building solutions for, at least have a process defined so that if that does happen, the team knows exactly what should be done, instead of trying to figure it out at that point of time. And these kind of game days help a lot with performing this kind of a pre-mortem exercise. And the biggest thing is learning from all operational failures. Whenever something happens, there is a problem. Don't just perform a root cause analysis and document that aspect, but also spend that share that knowledge out with everybody else who should know about it, and then perform the exercise of how do we go back and make improvements to our process. How do we learn from this? How can we teach somebody else from all the pain that the team just went through in dealing with an incident, so that the other teams don't have to go through a similar problem or similar pain. So these are all design principles that you want to incorporate into your team and into your thought process as deeply as possible. Now let's switch to the AWS Well-Architected tool inside the console. When you search for the AWS Well-Architected tool, this is the landing page that you will get. So what I'm going to do is, for this video, we'll define a workload. I'm just going to call it workload sample demo. And this is for a demo. I'm just going to say I am the owner. This is so this is a pre-production environment. You would select production if you're doing this for an actual live application. And if you're doing this for an application that's not currently live, then select pre-production. This is helpful for AWS behind the scenes in their reporting and when they look at what sort of risks are being identified. They will not come back and reach out to you for pre-production workloads, but if you do have production workloads and you've got a well-architected review which identifies some key risks, then you can expect to hear from somebody within AWS or from your partners to come to really help you mitigate those risks to the extent possible. The rest of these are optional questions, so I'm going to skip them for now. Now we've got the workload setup. I'm just selecting the core framework questions for now, but there are other lenses available if you want to look at them at your own time. So we've got the workload defined. Let's start reviewing this so we can get to the questions. And it starts with the operational pillar. So we'll start right into the operations side. Now, when we look at the like I said, as earlier, the way these questions are organized, they do cover all the 4 different areas that we talked about, which are about your organization, about getting prepared for operational workloads to be put for workloads to be operationalized in AWS. And then performing the actual operations on your workloads, and then evolving your operational processes. So that's how these 11 questions are organized across those 4 areas. Now, the first one is, how do you determine what your priorities are? Now, this refers to your workload and understanding what drives the evolution of the workload. Are those are changes to the workload coming from what our external customers are asking for? Are you looking at what your internal customer needs are? And internal customer needs will include what the operations team will need or what the infosec team needs, stuff like that. But all any other key stakeholders within the organization that require you to perform certain things within your workload so that their job becomes easier. Those all become part of internal customer needs. There may be governance requirements. Maybe you have some internal governance teams that require you to report out information in a certain manner. So you want to build that into your workload. Those could be part of requirements that flow into what priorities you need to focus on. Compliance requirements, things like FedRAMP, HIPAA, PCI, some of these compliance tools also have specific things that you need to perform within your workload to stay compliant, and so those could become requirements that flow into your team to work on the environment. Looking at a threat landscape, this is closely tied to your compliance requirements, but also, some teams have additional threat landscape definitions in place to say, what would be considered as threats, especially if you're in certain industries where kind of attacks are prevalent and common. You may want to work with your information security team to understand what kind of a threat landscape they have defined so that you're making sure that you're aligning with their needs. Evaluating trade-offs is another determination of your priorities. Sometimes organizations and teams may have certain phases in which you've got you need to prioritize performance over say cost. You may have more budget available because you know that you need to have a time period of high usage, and so making sure that performance of the application is a higher priority, even though it may cost a little bit more. Or in some other cases, you may actually have cost as a higher trade-off requirement than say reliability. So you may come back and say, okay, we're not going to do for this particular application, we will live without having a highly available workload. And if things go down, then we'll just take the time to recover from it. But that will help us save a significant amount from our budget, which is a higher priority at that point of time. So looking at those trade-offs is an important aspect of determining what your priorities could be, and that needs to be part of the process for how you decide which areas the team is going to work on in evolving the workload. And then managing benefits and risks, that also is pretty much similar to the trade-off aspect of it, to say, what are going to be certain risks, and making sure that you're minimizing your risks and maximizing your benefits as you make some of these changes. So if you do find that certain areas are not applicable to your particular environment or your workload, based on the kind of things that you do, you may choose to actually exclude them. And you can do that by saying, okay, this application, let's say, as an example, this one doesn't have any external users, it only has internal users. So in that case, you could just say it's out of scope. There may be just business priorities that make you not focus on certain things. Or you may have architecture constraints. That's pretty much common in any commercial off-the-shelf applications, any COTS applications, where you're restricted to the kind of things that you can perform with that application. And so certain architecture constraints will prevent you from becoming, following those well-architected best practices. And that's just because it's not relevant for your particular use case. So you can choose this as a way to define why you won't be able to perform that particular best practice. So I'm going to, and you can also take some notes. I find this useful in capturing any feedback or any descriptions that I get from the teams that I work with. A lot of times they share information which goes beyond these few evaluation criteria, and it's also always helpful to have that as additional context to say, this is what everything that the team is doing, and here are the different other things that we've talked about, which will help somebody else on the team as they look at this report, as they look at the documentation here, they'll have just a better context and understanding of what the application and the workload is. So I find it useful to fill out as much as possible in this tool. All right, the next question is, how do you structure your organization to support your business outcomes? Now, this is more talking about, you need to have some linkage between what your team is doing with the particular workload that you have and how it impacts your larger business need. And how is the team structured to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and how they impact the larger goals. So having identified owners, you know exactly who is responsible for different portions of your application and the infrastructure and the resources that are therein. Some organizations have dedicated teams towards storage and databases, or specific application areas. And so if that is the case, then just is there a clear definition of who owns certain portions of those resources, so that when there is a problem, there is no confusion or misunderstanding between, oh, I thought that person was going to take care of this. I didn't know I was responsible for that part. We want to avoid those kind of situations, especially at the time when there is a problem going on. The next one is around having processes and the procedures also having clear ownership. So if there is a process, say incident response, and somebody is responsible for kicking off a call where everybody gets together to talk about an incident, then having a good definition of who is going to be responsible for performing that particular step or following that procedure is an important aspect. Again, similar to the resource aspect, if this is not well defined, there is room for confusion, and things might not happen because folks may make assumption that somebody else was actually going to take care of it, but it didn't get completed. Your operations activities, they should have identified owners responsible for their performance. So somebody needs to look at, whether these operational activities are being done on time, and are the responses within the SLAs, the service level agreement that we have in place. And if not, then they can raise the flag to say things are not happening on time. We need to get together, make reviews, and figure out what to improve. So it's important to have somebody responsible for the performance of your operational activities. And then, clarity amongst the team. Everybody knows what they're responsible for. It's generally it's pretty clear, but in teams where there are multiple folks working on the same component of the same module, you still want to make it exclusively clear to them that you are going to be responsible for any operational issues that happen within A, B, and C modules. That way, when something does happen, they know that they are going to be on point for responding to it, and then they could potentially pass on the particular incident to somebody else who also knows about it, but at least the rest of the team has one point of contact that they know to reach out to when it comes to a specific area that has a problem. Um, and then having mechanisms to identify responsibility and ownership. So beyond just every team member knowing what they're responsible for, having it published somewhere so that anybody who wants to look up, this information about who should I reach out to about this particular storage array, then they have a place to go look at that, identify who to call or reach out to, and then make it easier for them to uh, have that conversation or communication. The next one is about mechanisms existing to manage changes, and this is more around the standard ticketing system that we have in place, or a change control board, something that allows you to track what is being added, what is being modified, and where exceptions are being allowed, so that the process and the resources as they exist, there is clear audit trail for why things are being done the way they're being done. And these responsibilities between teams are also some things that have been thought through, talked about, they've been defined and agreed upon. That's an important aspect when it comes to inter-team communication, so that when one team says, okay, this is beyond what what I'm responsible for, or what I can fix as part of an incident, they need to hand that off to a different team. Then the other team should also have somebody to receive that problem or that incident and actually work on it. So knowing the structure of how you're organized is an important aspect for being prepared for your operational incidents and anything that might come up in the day-to-day operational workings. The next question, I'm going to go through this. The next question is the culture of the organization and how that culture supports your business outcomes. You want your culture, as in the leadership, to be aligned with supporting the teams to improve the outcomes, to make sure that they have what they need in order to do their best work. So having executive sponsorship, at least one executive leader who has the success of your workload in the cloud tied to their success criteria, so that there is a direct link with their responsibilities, and then having team members empowered to take action when outcomes are at risk. This is all about reducing any steps about getting approvals and holding up until somebody else reviews it. Those kind of processes slow down the work that needs to be done in order to deal with an operational incident. For example, if you've got an operational incident where, let's say, you need to add more disk space in order for the application to continue working, for whatever reason, it ran out of disk space. We don't want to wait for an approval process to happen and before you can go in and actually make that change. The team members should be empowered to go make that change and then come back and work with the rest of the leadership to figure out why it reached that point where you had to add more disk space, what would be the cost of that, and then what can you do to actually, again, either revert from it, reduce the reason why storage ran out of space, and then come, if you need to undo that action, you can actually do that. But all of that need not hold up getting the system back up and running, and that's what this empowerment talks about. You want to encourage escalation. Typically, we find that in different organizations, escalation is seen as a bad thing, and so team members, they are afraid to escalate an issue and bring it up to the leadership, because they may be seen as incompetent, or they may be seen as somebody who didn't know how to fix a problem, and so now it's going up to the next level. But in reality, escalation is actually a really good tool, and it's a good process to have in place, and it should be encouraged. The sooner and the earlier you can inform your leadership and the next level up that there is a problem going on, and the whole culture around it is that escalation allows others to be available to you to help out where they can, and just focus on solving the problem, and not about who is doing what, or who, where things, who dropped the ball. If that shift is already there within the organization or within the team, then escalations become a really good tool in getting everybody together to solve the problem. Now, having communications that are timely, clear, and actionable, this is also part of, just how communication flows within the teams, making sure that you've got mechanisms in place, clearly in which situation, what kind of communication tool you want to use, when to use chat versus when to use email, when phone calls would be the preferred options, right? So these are the things that your team should have a good understanding of, and it's something that's in practice across the organization. Encourage experimentation, allow the team members to try out new tools, try out new features and capabilities that come out, see what works better, and if it doesn't work better, go back to something else that might actually work better. So enabling the teams to try out different things will lead you to an operational excellence in your environment. The next one is around the leadership and management supporting the team to take the time for maintaining and growing their skill sets. Things are changing so rapidly in the technology space that if we don't take conscious effort to go and up to learn more about what's going on, what the new tools are and how they operate, it's going to be really hard to maximize the benefits from those tools, and also like establishing a better operating model will not happen unless what else is out there. You've tried it, you've learned it, and then now you can use it appropriately within your team. Resourcing teams appropriately. This is another one that management sometimes needs to be convinced about, but making sure that you've got the right skills on the team. Not everybody is going to be able to step up and take over all of the required roles. So making sure that certain roles that need to be in place in order for the workload to be managed and operated on, that they are staffed properly. If they need training, then they're trained appropriately. If you need to get somebody else to fill a gap, then work with the management team to make sure that those gaps are being filled. That way, when a problem happens, you've got the right folks on call or available to solve that problem. And then the last piece around, allowing everybody to speak up and share their opinions, so that different perspectives can be looked at when you're evaluating your workloads, whether it's pre-production deployments, and making sure that you've thought through all the pieces that need to go into getting ready for a workload. But also when there is a problem going on, different perspectives and different questions can help narrow down the problem and solving it much faster. So encouraging that piece is a really important aspect of the culture that supports operational excellence. All right, now let's look at the next one. The next is now we're going beyond the organizational aspect and moving more into preparing your workloads for operational excellence. So designing your workloads so that you can understand its state, that's an important aspect where you need to know what's happening within your application at any given point of time. So are you using tools like application telemetry? Do you have, sufficient workload telemetry to understand within the application where each of the different components are, how are they operating and working within the larger application scope? uh, Looking at user activity and what's happening, from a user perspective, and looking at different dependencies that the application has. And this dependency can be seen as both internal and external dependency. So if your application depends on a third-party web service, and making sure that you have some monitoring to know that the third-party web service is operating as expected, which means that your application is not being impacted. But if that third-party application has a problem, then you have a better understanding of why your application is behaving the way it is. And then also going down to the detail of a transaction traceability. So looking at a transaction all the way from a user action back into your database or your storage, so that the end-to-end view is available. And that way, if something takes longer than expected, if your performance is being impacted, then you know exactly which portion of your transaction started to have the problem or took longer than expected, and then you can have the team make improvements in that space. The next one focuses on the actual change process. This is how do you focus on uh, reducing defects, easing your remediation, and improving the flow into production. So having a version control system in place that is being used appropriately, and your teams are capturing all the changes that are being done, putting them back into your version control system. The whole team has to follow the discipline around it. That's when you can rely on the version control to revert back to a working version if there is a problem in the current version. Having a process to test and validate those changes before they go out to the next stage in your deployment. This applies not just to production, but also pre-production, making sure that you've got unit tests and integration tests and those things built out. That should be part of the process and automated as much as possible. But where it cannot be automated, at least have a manual process in place to test and validate that the changes that are being done are not breaking something else. Having configuration management systems, if it is relevant to your environment, that helps a lot in having a central database for all of the configuration that is being used. That way, if something changes, you know exactly how to recreate that, or where in the configuration a change happened that might have caused an operational impact. Using build and deployment management systems, these are for application or code bases which are actually being compiled in real time, or as part of an application that's developed in-house. That may be relevant for those kind of applications, and less so for commercial off-the-shelf applications. Though in some cases, the build and deployment systems can also help with COTS applications where specific configurations may be needed, and so you can use the pipelines to perform all of those steps in an automated fashion and consistent manner every time. Performing patch management is another important aspect, so that you've got your systems being patched for any security and operational updates that come in. Being able to share your design standards, there has to be some centralized knowledge base, that if one team has figured out that this design pattern works well for the kind of environment that you have in your organization, then being able to share that so that other teams can build upon that rather than going through the whole process of doing it all on their own. And that would ease their process of getting things over into production in a faster way. Having a practice to review your code, doing code reviews and doing deep dives into the code quality, so that can improve over a period of time. Uh, Taking the time to clear out your tech debt is another aspect of the culture and this best practice that helps with keeping your code up to date and clean enough that when changes have to be made, it makes it easy for the team to perform those changes. Make sure you're using multiple environments. At least have a development environment, a test environment, a production environment. Some organizations even use a pre-production or a staging environment, and they've got another one for bug fixes, which is more of a hot fix environment. So based on the kind of use case you have and what makes sense, balance out the cost with this kind of the setup that you need to have in place. The good thing is you can replicate those environments because of the code that you have, and that makes it easy, but it does come at a cost. So, that has to be factored in. Making frequent small reversible changes, we've talked about it. That obviously helps with being able to reverse out of any issues that come with a change that was made, and it minimizes the impact you have on your customers and your users. Um, Fully automating integration and deployment. This is the end state that everybody would be working towards. This helps you reach a level of this shows that you've reached a level of maturity where all the changes that are being made, they get through a pipeline. That pipeline performs integration, it performs testing, it makes sure that all the checks and balance checks are being passed, and then only then it also performs the deployment over into production or into the next environment, and that whole pipeline driven process is a sign of a mature development environment. So the sooner you can get to that, it's good feedback that the team is doing all the right things. Mitigating deployment risks. This is all about having approaches that will give you quick feedback, and just get to rapid recovery where the changes that are being made that don't have the expected outcomes. So the biggest thing is just make sure that you have thought through what unsuccessful changes would end up doing and plan for those. So that if a change is being introduced into the environment and it is unsuccessful, how will things break? What will get impacted? Just knowing those will help you minimize that future impact, or at least the potential impact. We talked about testing and validating changes. This helps you with minimizing your deployment risks. Having deployment management systems, this goes back to the pipeline aspect of it. Even if it's not a pipeline, but it is a tool that is configured to specifically look at taking your code, deploying that into the environment, making sure that the deployment step was completed successfully, and then going to each and every resource and then deploying it there, tracking which servers got updated properly, which ones did not. Those are all things that a deployment management system can do for you, and that gives the team a good understanding of how far the problem might be when something goes wrong. Testing using limited deployments. This can be done in many different ways. You could have some changes made in one environment and then have a few users coming into that environment. So you've got a limited impact on just those users for the change that you've made. And there are many other strategies that can be applied there. So think about how that can be leveraged in your environment if it is relevant, where you could have limited deployments being done and then test it out before you do the full-blown deployment. Deploy using parallel environments. This is also known as the blue-green model in DevOps, where you've got one entire environment that's up and running using your current version, and then what you do is you deploy your entire application into a separate parallel environment, make sure it's up and running, everything is working, and then you just change the pointers so that your users coming in, they're now being directed to the new environment instead of the old environment. And there are many advantages to that kind of an approach, where if something goes wrong and this doesn't work, then it's a simple reversal of the pointers to the current environment where things haven't been removed until you've confirmed that the new environment was working properly. So for applications that can support this kind of a model, that works really well. And if you can lean towards getting that sort of a setup in place. We've talked about small reversible changes and the automation between integration and deployment, and then also automating your testing and rollback. This is part of the automated integration and deployment pipeline, where if as you're testing as part of the deployment process, if something does not work as expected, then you pause the deployment. But then post deployment, once you have everything deployed properly, you also test in the production environment. And at that point of time, if you find something is not working as expected, then your production environment can also be rolled back. That's what the final step is talking about. And having that in place, obviously, make sure that operationally you will have fewer problems to deal with. All right. So the next one is, how do you know that you're ready to support a workload? This is also part of preparing to get into the production environment. So making sure that you've got enough capability on your team to manage the workloads when they're in production. A lot of times what happens is the development team or the application team develops something, and then they hand it off to another operational team that's going to manage the day-to-day operations of that application. So making sure that the operations team has a good understanding of what needs to be done with this application. That's what the first item is talking about. Ensuring that a consistent review of operational readiness is being performed across all of the applications, but also across all of the teams. So you may see within your application team that operational readiness is good to go. You've got your checklists and you've performed all of those things, but having the other team also performing the same level of detailed review and consistent review is important, because that's how you know that a good handoff is going to happen between your team and the operations team, or whichever other team is going to be involved in this process. Using runbooks to perform procedures. This helps. Runbooks are like checklists that have been defined, step-by-step instructions to say, if this procedure has to be followed, do this, this, and this. Things like, if you want to figure out what was happening on a server, you need to log in, you need to run this command, capture the output, send that over to the subject matter expert. Those should be part of your runbooks that have been defined, so that anybody who is responding to that particular incident and performing that procedure can do it in a consistent fashion. Using playbooks to investigate issues. This is very similar as the runbooks for performing procedures, but playbooks are more specific to what needs to be done when there is a problem going on. That could be things like, am I able to ping the server? Am I able to log into the server or not? Like those kind of things would be part of your playbooks, so you can investigate where the problem really is, and narrow down the time it takes to get to the problem statement. And then making informed decisions to deploy systems and changes. This is more about the linkage with traditional change advisory boards, or change control boards, things like that, where you're talking to a larger team. You're thinking about what could be the impact of a system being deployed, and if that is something that's within the acceptable space, and everybody is prepared for that, then you're making that informed decision to go forward with it. It's called go no go decision points, and in many teams that I've worked with, it's a checkpoint to say, are we truly ready to go live with this workload, and is everybody prepared and in their place to support it when this goes live. All right, so now we're in that phase where your workload is operational, it's up and running, it's in production. So now let's see how we understand the health of the workload. Is everything working as expected? So in order for us to be prepared for that, we need to know what are those key performance indicators that will tell us if the workload is healthy. Is that going to be CPU? Is it memory? Is it the number of connections that are that the system is responding to? It could be, a variety of different things. So what is relevant in your environment, in your workload? What are the key performance indicators that should be identified and tracked over a period of time? You want to define your workload metrics also, which is those the achievement of those KPIs and and connect it back to business outcomes. So you've got something where you may have, say, a shopping cart. So in that case, the number of orders being placed would be a workload metric, and a key performance indicator would be the number of users that are using your application. So there's a connection between KPIs and workload metrics, but workload metrics would be more geared towards your business use, and KPIs would be more towards your systems and your entire environment's actual indicators. Now, the next one around collecting and analyzing your workload metrics, just having them defined and collected is one thing, but have a team or somebody in place whose job it is to look at those workload metrics and trending over a period of time to say, is this going in the right direction? And if it's not, then they can work with the team to figure out how to make improvements in that space. Establishing those workload metrics baselines, in the initial period, track it over for a few days, so this is the standard expected number of users that I should have. Every day I expect 1,500 users, give or take, in that range that you would have, and so that's a baseline. But then if one day you see 20,000 users, then that's a spike. That's an unexpected behavior, right? So you want those kind of anomalies to to have context of my baseline is 1,500. Right now I'm at 20,000. That's an anomaly. And that also talks about, like, the next one talks about the similar thing, like learning those expected patterns of activity, so when something is unexpected. And when something unexpected does happen, then have a way to alert the right stakeholders so that they can take action on that. And then the last piece being validating the achievement of outcomes and the effectiveness of KPIs and metrics. The same thing I talked about earlier in terms of collecting and analyzing those workload metrics, making sure that whatever we're using as a way to track these KPIs and metrics, make sure that they're actually helping you achieve the outcomes that you've set as the goals for the organization or for the team. So I'm sorry, if the outcomes are increasing revenue, then are we looking at all of these metrics for shopping cart and number of items being sold? Is that really helping us increase revenue? In case you're looking at some metrics that are not tying directly back to revenue in this example, then you may want to revisit the metrics and the KPIs that you're looking at so that you can improve that and really help tie the story back together with your business outcomes. The next one is around understanding the health of your operations. This is more about the process aspect of it, and do you have the right metrics and the KPIs to understand the process of your operations? This is more around things like, do you know what is the mean time to acknowledge an incident? What is the mean time to respond to an incident? Mean time to resolution, or how many days does it take for a change to go from request to production? Like, there are all these different kind of metrics that you can have to talk about the operations and those KPIs that can feed into those operational metrics. So similar to the previous one, this is more around the operations health and less about the workload health. But as you can see, it's all of the same, evaluation criteria that we would be looking at. So moving on to the next one, how do you manage workloads and operational events? This is around responding to any incidents or events that happen. So making sure that you have a process in place for event management, incident management, and problem management. So the way these differ is event management is just any kind of alert happening. You have a process in place to receive the alert and evaluate it. If that alert is if that event is something that correlates to other things going on and there is it looks like there may be a problem, then that would be considered as an incident. And then kicking off the next process for how you manage an incident. An incident would be it needs an evaluation. So you reach out to the person on call. Somebody has to look at it, evaluate, triage the incident, figure out if if this is a true problem and things are going to be down, users are going to be impacted, then you convert that incident into a problem. And then another process kicks off from there where the problem has to now be managed, which means now other teams have to be involved. Some communication needs to go out to the users to say, yep, we're aware of this thing, this impact on our system. You will not be able to log in, or let's say if a certain portion of it is impacted, then at least a message can be sent out to the users that this is a known problem, this behavior is happening, and we will let you know when this is resolved. Having that definition is a very important part of being prepared to respond to operational incidents. Having a process per alert. This again, whatever alerts come in, make sure that you know what to do when that alert comes in. So this is just, it's a two-way correlation. Prioritize operational events based on business impact. So knowing which kind of events coming in are going to have what kind of business impact is an important prerequisite for this kind of prioritization. So if you know that if my shopping cart is down, then obviously that's going to impact my revenue, then that needs to be prioritized over somebody who is trying to make an update to their phone number. And I'm making this up, but that could change. That could wait a little bit longer, and it's okay if that if that doesn't happen in real time. But if the operational cart has to the shopping cart has to be updated, then that event needs to be prioritized. Having a definition of your escalation paths, knowing exactly who the next level of contact is when something is not happening or not getting resolved on time is an important aspect. So if you know that my first point of contact is this on-call person, and my second level contact is going to be the subject matter expert for that particular topic. And if both of them have not responded in time, that means I have an escalation that needs to go to the manager that is responsible for that team. And if the manager also doesn't respond on time and gets to acknowledge the problem, then you want to escalate to the next level, which could be somebody in leadership. The idea behind this is we don't want issues to just stay out there and get stagnant. We want people involved in responding back to those incidents, and having an escalation path defined earlier or before we even go live helps us in dealing with the operational incident, because if something does happen, then somebody up the chain is going to get informed when an incident is not getting looked at. Enabling push notifications. Nowadays, everybody has cell phones, but the idea behind this is you don't want somebody to keep checking their email or log on to a portal and then keep refreshing the screen to know if there is an incident. You want that incident to be pushed out to you, whether it's through email notifications or through an app that sends you a notification, or a phone call, something that that is pushed out from the system over to the recipient so that they can take action on this. Having dashboards to show status, that's very helpful for the larger organization to see the status of your application, or for even external users to know this is how the status of my system is. That way, if they are having a problem reaching or in their services that are utilizing your systems, then they can go check the status page and know that there is a problem going on, and then they'll just be patient or wait until that issue is resolved. And then automating all of this that we've talked about, making sure that, if there is an incident, if there is a problem, being able to update the dashboard directly as an automated step, those kind of things would be important in getting this in a consistent and quicker way out to your audience. All right, so now we're at the last question on the operations piece, which is how do you evolve your operations? This is all about making sure that there is a feedback loop in place that, when incidents happen, you've got a way to learn from what happened and then coming back and improving your processes as needed. That's what all of these items are talking about, having a process for continuous improvement. That process needs to be well defined, but not just defined, but actually performing those post-incident analysis and then taking that as analysis and putting that back into a knowledge base. Having that feedback loop so that whoever was involved in the process is able to contribute towards that knowledge. Having a knowledge management system in place, defining those drivers for improvement, identifying where the areas for frustration are, and then using those as drivers for improvement to say, hey, it's this in this particular incident, it really didn't help that nobody was able to receive phone calls, and so let's have that as a driver for improvement in the next phase and work towards making that a better experience. It could be something as simple as that. Validating those insights that we've captured over a period of time to say, did those changes actually help improve how we perform these operational incidents and responses to them? Performing those reviews for the operational metrics, and then documenting and sharing your lessons learned. That this reflection helps the team also think about what they've learned and what they want to do differently, and sharing it just psychologically, sort of cements that lesson learned. And then the next time something happens, that same team is going to perform much better. So sharing that lesson learned is an important step that should be done, for all your major incidents that happen. And work with your management to have some time allocated to making these improvements. It should not just be thrown into the backlog and sit there, but prioritize those improvements so that your overall operational process continues to improve over a period of time, and the frustrations don't just happen again and again every time there is an operational incident. All right, so that covers all of the questions that we've got for this pillar, and I know this has been a long video, a lot of information in there. So I encourage you to go through the documentation on the AWS website, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask those questions to me. I will be happy to respond to them as quickly as I can. And I wish you all the best. And in the next video, we'll go over the security questions. Thank you.